All right, are we on? 1, 2, 3. And now you make it. All right. Welcome, welcome. All right. Here's my grandson over there. We could all just sit here tonight and just coo at him.
I'll go take a nap if you want.
Be all right. All right. Welcome to youth counseling. This would be class number 5. Last night we covered the foundations, value, character, discipline in our first session. And then we covered relationships. And then the breakdown. If you remember, and I'm try and kind of illustrate this. I'm going to use this, see if this green marker works a little bit better. But if you think about, I used the analogy of a petri dish last night, but you know, if you think about kind of having a little pot here and it's on the flame, you know, maybe you got 2, and you're cooking up a life, right? And so in one pot, you throw in a dad that is engaged, involved, and you know, teaching his kids, and a mom that's following dad and submissive to his leadership, and a pastor that's preaching and teaching that they're following. You know, you got all these things in this pot over here, and you know, so you're cooking up something over here. It's going to produce one thing because you're using different ingredients, right? Over here, you got a deadbeat dad, and he's you know, not involved. You got mom she's distracted, looking at everything else out in the world. Pastor is not followed if he's involved in any fashion, because maybe he's not. Maybe it's not that he's not willing, but he may not be because of the reaction of mom and dad to him. He may not have the influence that he needs to have. And in this pot now, what you have is you have your outside influences that kind of come in. So you've got your friends, and you've got your, you know, social media influencers. These are the rock stars and the, you know, YouTube stars, or, you know, whatever it is out there, and so forth. Now, over here, those peers and those social influences, if this is right, those are kept outside, right, versus being brought inside. And so the ingredients are different, and so the stew that's produced here is going to be different, right? I mean, you're going to have a different outcome because you're putting different ingredients in. And so you've got this foundational philosophies that are different. You've got relationship issues that are different. You've got, then add into that pot there their perspective or relationship with God, their reverence of God. How do they deal with, how do they walk? Do they walk with God? Do they have a real walk with God, or is it completely superficial? Do they only have as much walk with God as you know, someone at church has, and they just kind of pick off a little bit on the side, and they're not really engaged? And then you put into that then also the natural issues of rebellion. They're getting to that age that they're starting to want to exert their identity, and we talked about identity there. And if their parents are not the kind of parents, biblical kind of parents, then they start having this natural rejection of their parents' norms, whatever those norms might be, and they start looking for identity, right? And so this is where we kind of ended last night. Where are they going to find that reflection? Where are they going to find their identity, their reflection? Well, they're going to look out into this world because it's not in the home. And they're going to look into music, and they're going to look into entertainment, and they're going to look into cultural things around them, and they're going to try and find something that they feel reflects how they feel, okay? Now, we're going to throw one more thing into this pot to spice it up a bit, I guess you might say. And the other thing we're going to throw into this pot is whoops, there we go, I pulled that off. The other thing we're going to throw into this pot is their response to this aloneness issue, okay? See, remember here, the family cure is working in this environment, okay? When dad is attentive to the kids and he's being the kind of dad he should be, now not perfect, but the kind of dad he should be, and the kids feel like they have access to him, they're close to him, he cares about them, all those things. And mom is being the kind of mom she should be, not perfect, but the kind of mom that she should be. And they're engaged in the church, and their relationships in the church are right with the pastor, with their Sunday school teachers, with the leaders in the church. And you can tell, I mean, it's amazing to me the difference in kids where, one kid can go sit down and talk to any adult, I get this comment quite frequently lately about Elizabeth, my oldest granddaughter. And I've had at least 3 people tell me this in the last month or so. They'll say, yeah, Elizabeth comes and sits down and she'll just carry on a conversation with you. She's 7, and she goes and sits and talks with the adults in our church and carries on real conversations and all that, and they're very impressed by that. Why are they impressed by that? Well, because a lot of kids can't even look an adult in the eye, right? There's a distinction, there's a separation there between them and those in the church, and it shouldn't be that way, okay? And so this pot is producing this family cure where not only is the physical family intact and it's working properly and it's helping to solve this area of aloneness, but then the church family is working as well, and the whole church is ministering and loving and caring and sharing and teaching and all of them are pointing them to this right relationship with the Heavenly Father. So that's what's being produced in this pot, okay? And friends and peers and so forth, they're going to have an impact, but they're not flavoring this pot near as much, okay, as they are over here. And so what happens then is that when this is absent, okay, when this is absent, then this aloneness issue gets magnified by the rot that happens in our culture, and it happens on both sides of this equation, okay? So I'm gonna erase this and put this back. All right, and this is sin in the world. And so on this side, the things that happen because of sin, this is where we would have our emotional pain dynamic, okay? This is where the emotional trauma is going to come in. Now, I only have the old copy. This is what's in the book. What's the book? Dynamics book. Okay, there's a copy for everybody right there. But, this emotional pain issue is how sin in the world affects us. Now, we can think about this, though, in a broader way, because there's only 3 things, and I usually never put less than 4 anymore, but, we've got abuse, right? And that could be verbal at home, mom and dad yelling, screaming, and all those type of things. It could be mental abuse, manipulation and so forth like that goes on and in a lot of homes. And there's a lot, we'll hit on manipulation here a little bit later on. But it could be physical abuse, right? And I'm not talking about proper corporal discipline. I'm talking about actual beating and so forth like that. Improper, angry discipline, okay? It could be sexual abuse. So it can come in numerous different forms, right? Then add into this equation, we're talking about kids, we're talking about betrayal. Because when there is a when there is a significant layer of authority in your life, that's when there's the most potential for betrayal. Okay, parents embarrassing you, and sharing things about you that you felt like should be confidential, or an authority not protecting you like they should, especially if there's abuse, mom and dad not protecting you. And I've counseled so many people where they were abused by a family member. They went to their mom and dad and they were basically told, listen, let's not talk about that. We don't want to get them in trouble or things like that. And unfortunately, even pastors who have done that same thing, and heaven help a pastor, heaven judge a pastor that would cover up the abuse of a child for the sake of his own ministry. That's wicked. And God can't bless a church that covers sin. That can't happen. So you're not helping your church. But that happens, and that betrayal is very deep. I was at a Bible college and doing a conference, and they had all their kids from the Bible college come in. And it was interesting because they wanted me to teach on counseling. And these are freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior, okay? And I'm teaching counseling to pastors and missionaries, and master's level Bible college graduates and so forth. But so I start, and it was like glaze on their eyes for the first day. Like no connection hardly at all. Some of the seniors seemed to pick it up, The second morning, the end of that first day, I hit on betrayal. And it was the most crazy thing I'd ever seen. When I hit on betrayal, almost everyone in the auditorium just leaned forward. And it was like I hit a very serious nerve in that room. All right. And I was stunned. So the next morning, instead of going on with where I was, I spent the whole morning dealing with betrayal. And they were just like sponges. They had questions. I did not realize until that moment how serious the issue is for young people with betrayal. It's a very serious issue. It's a very deep wound. They feel it very seriously, and it really magnifies aloneness when they feel betrayed. Okay, because there's now, if this person I should have been able to trust, I can't trust. What am I supposed to do now? I can't trust anybody. And so it's a big issue, and there's materials I have on betrayal in some other places. But betrayal. But then also with a young person, we could use another B here. We could use bullying. All right, because that's something that takes place for young people a lot, isn't it? And it happens everywhere. It's crazy. It happens everywhere. It's at school. It's at church. It's in the neighborhood. It could be at home, between siblings. If they're on social media, which they should not be. We had a police officer doing a thing one time, and someone asked, at what age is the right age for your kids to get, a cell phone? And the officer, this guy's response was, as soon as you're okay with them looking at pornography. It's a serious issue, and he was 100% right. But so many of them are on social media and the online bullying, and people are horrible. They're bad enough in person. Then put anonymity there, or put that space there, and people are just vicious and nasty, and it's a horrible thing. So bullying, and then conflict. Right? So now, a lot of times this conflict has to do with conflict between mom and dad in the home, but it could be between mom and dad and pastor and pastor's wife. It could be between mom and dad and youth director's wife, or Sunday school teacher, or parent and teacher in the school, or whatever, and there's just conflicts and stuff there. Then throw in the D's, divorce, death, disease. Any one of those and all of those cause a lot of emotional trauma. Then add in, we're talking about kids here. A lot of times I just go A through D, but we're talking about kids, so add in educational challenges. Because maybe they don't learn well like some of the other kids. Maybe they don't learn the same way other kids do. They struggle in school. They're dyslexic. They have this problem or that problem. And I remember at 4th grade, Jeshua, my oldest son, coming home and just in tears every day, crying and saying, I'm just stupid and I don't want to live. I want to die. I don't ever want to go back to school. I'm dropping out. I mean, in 4th grade, there's major trauma in those things, okay? And I'm not just talking about getting a bad grade on a test. I mean, sometimes kids they don't do well in the setting that we use as a culture for school. So those can be traumatic times. And then financial pressures. And it may be because of the finances of the home. It may be because of individually this kid's looking at what other kids at school have or other kids around them have, and they have this and they have that, and I don't have any of that, and there's embarrassment, and there's a sense of shame that we're poor, we're this, we're that, and so all of those things can be very traumatic as well for a kid. And so we could go on and on. I mean, we could just keep listing things here that can create or magnify that sense of aloneness and can be traumatic. And so what we're really doing is we're creating inlets here for emotional pain, right? And then the natural result is escape. They don't know how to deal with it, so they're going to escape. What are some ways in which they try and escape? We could just give a litany of things here, but let's say cutting. That is a big escape point for young people, and a reason you're going to have them come in for counseling. And so my goal here in these outlines, okay, is that you begin to see, okay, here's the problem, and these are the things that are leading to it, and we can trace them back, okay? We can trace this in a cohesive way to know where we should start when we have this young person come in with these issues. So cutting, addiction, pornography, promiscuity, right? Anger, fantasy life, and that would be a lot of times like I don't know what to do with them. They won't do anything but play their video game. They have no desire to be involved with the family. They're completely isolated from everyone and everything and so forth, because it's easier to be Elf Lord 3000 than Bobby, because Bobby has too many problems, and I don't know how to deal with Bobby's problems, but I know how to kill people over here and Revenge of the Ninjas or something like that. I don't know if that's an actual game or whatever, but it should be. It's a great name. I copyright that if you're listening, all right? So escape can come in many different forms, but you need to recognize when someone's practicing escape that it's not the problem. In other words, and we talked about this last night a bit, that the music isn't the problem. The music is telling you where the problem lies, okay? It's identifying what it is they feel inside if we look at it properly. These things are, say, well, are you saying, sexual promiscuity and pornography and addiction, that's not a problem? It is a problem, but it's not the root of the problem, it's the outgrowth of the problem. It's the thing they're trying to use to solve this problem, which was created over here and is feeding this aloneness issue that feeds the bad identity to where they think that they don't have any more value than that. They're not worth more than to throw themselves away in the back seat of some car with some boy that doesn't care about them at all. They don't have any value. There's no value in them. Why would they go try hard? Why try? I'll never be anything anyway. I might as well do this the rest of my life, you know. And so it's that connection point, right? And so this is where the emotional pain book comes into play, and it's important to use that. The answers here, and I'm not gonna flesh out, because I do in other classes more, in the undergraduate classes. By this point, you really ought to have a good handle on this. But you got to create an outlet in prayer, and you got to cut off the inlets, right? And how do we do that? Through forgiveness, okay? And so we have God here, and he looks down at Christ. Here's all of time, and here you are. And God, for Christ's sake, forgives you. And so this person that has offended you, whether in whatever fashion here, you have to take that offense to the cross, and you, for Christ's sake, have to forgive them, right? And that's detailed in a far more meticulous way in the book, Emotional Pain book. And I will take these books, I will take this book, and I will have them work through it one section at a time, do the exercises, and I have them, I'll explain it, and then I'll have them go read it. And I may explain a couple sections and have them go read it, depending on the person, okay? Have them read a couple sessions. And this is the homework. Go read these, reinforce what we're talked about, do the exercises, bring it back. We start the next session where we deal with the issues there in their homework. We cover that, and then we move on, and I instruct a little more, give them a little homework, and we're working through that process. That's what these are. These books are for the protocols. They're for you to use to work through these. So everything right here, everything on this side right there is covered in that one little book. Okay? What's not covered in this book is you figuring out that this is where the problem is. That's where the counseling comes in. And then this is helping to identify, isolate, remove, deal with those, create that outlet, practice forgiveness to cut off the inlets of pain and so forth like that. Okay, so that's where, the process works through. Are there any questions about this side? We're talking about rot here, and I'm just using that word, meaning this stuff goes in the pot, right? And I think that the issue often is that the stuff here and what we're going to talk about next over here create, when they're mixed in with a dad that's not involved, a mom that's distracted, a pastor that's not looked to, no worship of God, my peers are my counselors, and my social media influencers are the ones that I look to for answers. And then you add this in, it's going to create a lot of wrong things over here, and it's going to lead them faster into these destructive lifestyles, these destructive actions, okay? If mom and dad are there, and the right relationship is there, and the worship of God is present, it's not that these things aren't going to happen. These things will happen, but they're not going to necessarily lead to the same destructive behaviors, okay? Why? Because there was a fortification against these, there's a place they can go to get help, to get answers. They're not isolating themselves and not finding the answers that they need, okay? So does that make sense? Questions? The microphone's in between there if there's questions.
said about everybody experiences, all those different things, trials in life. So everybody's going to deal with emotional pain, but whether you choose to, take that to the Lord and immediately go to that outlet, or you take it to a place of escape. Maybe there's no outlet, so it just builds up to
Right.
the point of it's going to burst.
Okay, exactly. And so let's say, for instance, and I'll just use my kids as an example here. So, did my kids have traumatic things happen to them? Okay. Did they ever experience bullying, betrayal by authorities, conflicts, death in the family, or disease and sickness, educational pressures, financial pressures? Sure, all of these things. I think everything here except for abuse.
Yeah.
Okay, and divorce. Right. I mean, but Mom and I have been meaning to talk to you about something. Anyway, so all that stuff is present. Now, what's the difference? Well, the difference is when those things happened, what did they do? They came to me. They came to their mom. They said, "What do I do?" And we ministered to them. We helped them, right? We taught them how to pour it out to God. We taught them how to forgive. We taught them how to move forward. And so it didn't end their emotional, intellectual, and spiritual growing at that point. It didn't turn to, I've got to find some other outlet, right? And so bad things are going to happen to every child. The rot is going to happen to everyone because we're in the world.
Right.
Okay? But when the ingredients in the pot are more what they ought to be, okay, then there's more likelihood that we're able to deal with this in a healthy way and put it away instead of it becoming dominating in the life. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay.
I just said when the parents are stable,
You-
the relationship with God is more stable.
Use the microphone.
We've seen it like with the teen group, like when the parents' relationship is stable, their walk with God is more stable. and
Absolutely.
consistent.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. This is a handout I gave out last night. Kristen, I went to a preacher's meeting. I didn't get back till late. I'll send this handouts to you. I'm sorry. Okay. Let me hand these out. There's 2 there and 2 there. So this is the destructive thoughts chart. I will tell you, like most things I do, this is still in development, okay? Because I'm still learning, all right? So this is an updated version of something I shared in the summer. This last July was the first time I shared this, I think. And so this is an updated version already from there. But when you think about this, and I would essentially, okay, I'm not going to do it like this because, matter of fact, I'm not going to draw it up here because of just the space, but I would essentially take this chart and lay it in, boom, right like that. Does that make sense? So this is our response side to aloneness, okay? And so we've got the emotional pain dynamic over here, forgiveness and so forth, and then over here we've got this destructive thoughts pattern and the way we respond to things. Now I'm going to sit and go through it with you, but rather than draw it all up there. So I didn't. Eventually, this will have all the verses and stuff on it too. So there'll be another edition of this, but you can write the references and stuff down. But when I was in seminary, in counseling training under Brother Hayes, I learned a lot from Brother Hayes concerning expectations and so forth. That was a big issue I had. Okay, and Brother Hayes used a little stair step, if you will. Expectations lead to anger and to bitterness and to resentment and so forth. He didn't have any. He had scriptures about each of those things, but there wasn't he never had a text that showed the progression necessarily. He just told us it was there. Makes sense when you see it. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I mean, I can see that. But so anyway, after I got out of school and I started to teach on that, I really prayed a lot about a passage that would kind of show all that. I'm giving you a background here, because part of the doctorate is you have to develop your own protocol. Okay, so this is to help you with the doctorate protocol side. So I prayed about what to do, and I felt like Genesis 4 with Cain was probably the best example, where you see his broken expectation because God didn't accept his offering, and then you see his anger there, and then obvious, bitterness toward Abel, and vengeance is taken out on Abel, and so you can see the progression that Brother Hayes drew. You can see it really clearly in that text, and so I started using that text as a proof text for that chart. Now, fast forward to a couple years ago. I see this little video about a title on YouTube called Depression is Contagious by Michael Jakob. And I'm curious about the title, so I go and watch this video. Michael Jakob is a clinical psychologist in Australia, probably, I think. And he'd done 40 years of clinical psychological study on depression. And this video, he basically says that depression is actually the result of 5 thought patterns that are prominent in a person's life, and then cause that person to be manifest in depression. Okay, now, I would say, and he says, the majority of depression is caused this way. Now, we understand this about depression. Depression can be caused by physical things. Okay, a person has physical sickness, and they're down. Their body's not producing the chemicals it should. It's normal that then the emotions go down. Maybe they have a damaged thyroid or even pituitary gland, or various different things, and physical health can affect mood. It can affect how we feel. It can cause depression. There's no question about that. Actually, even just the monthly cycle of a woman can create those issues. Child bearing from the whole process, and then more dramatic after the process. Okay, post-traumatic, postpartum. Okay, it is traumatic for the husband. It's depressing for the wife, and so it's a postpartum. Menopause. I mean, you're talking about major hormone changes, major health changes, and all. So my point is, thought patterns aren't the only thing that can cause depression. Physical issues can cause depression, and spiritual issues can cause depression. Okay, and there's no doubt when you look in Scripture that spiritual warfare can be the cause of depressed feelings. Okay, and David talks about that to a certain extent, about the attacks of the enemy on him spiritually and the depression that comes as a result of that. But after 40 years of clinical study, this guy comes to the conclusion that the vast majority of people that face serious depression, it's a thinking problem. Because if it's a physical problem, you can treat it, right? Your cycle ends Your hormones can be supplemented. Your thyroid can be supplemented. And so, I mean, all of those things can be treated in a relatively easy, non-altering. I mean, they're not hard to treat once they're identified. Okay. Now, the problem isn't those circumstances. And by the way, you'll never counsel away a thyroid issue. You're never going to counsel away menopause. Okay, it's like that. That's not going to change. That does need a medical prescription. Okay, whether that prescription is for thyroid medicine or even for supplemental vitamins or whatever the case might be. Okay, there's something that needs to be dealt with physically there. You can't counsel away physical problems. But the greatest majority of people, he said, have depression as a result of these thinking patterns. And interesting, the thinking patterns, okay? So I'm thinking to the chart Brother Hayes dealt with, because right before someone falls off the deep end in that chart was depression, okay? So the idea being that these things lead to depression and then off the deep end. And I feel like I see that in Cain, right? That Cain goes off the deep end. He departs from the presence of the Lord. He manifests the evidences of depression, complete self-focus, and high expectations, and all of these type of things. Well, interesting. Here are these things that this guy says are primary evidences, and I won't go through all five, but he says expectations, a big one. Self-focus, a big one. Problem. He calls it rumination in the book, right? I call it problem fixation. And these things. So things that were present in Brother Hayes' chart, we were teaching from a biblical perspective. These things cause, and I've been doing this for now since I got out of school. I'm using this account in Genesis 4, and I'm teaching people this is the process, the issues that lead to depression. And then I read this guy's book, and he's like, after 40 years of clinical study, I've determined that these are the thought processes that lead to depression. And I'm like, we already knew that, right? We didn't know it because of the clinical study, but the clinical study verifies what we had been teaching all along, okay? And so my point is here that it was like, okay, that is what we have been teaching. But then what happened is I thought, I'm going to step back from that text and see what else I can see there. Because all I had used the text for, and this is what the danger is sometimes, that we're looking for something and we see only the part we're looking for, right? Because I had already had this chart. I'm looking for a text that illustrates it. And it just so happens this text illustrates all of those things. So I see those things, I put them down. So then after reading this book, I think, I wonder what else is in that text. I need to take a zoom out here and not just look for these things, but look at this text in such a way as to kind of pull out other things God is saying. Maybe there's more here because we already had more than his 5 points, okay? Maybe there's more here that I haven't looked for because I was just kind of looking for this. And so as I zoom out, this is the picture that comes from that, zooming out. This did not come from that book. It began with the chart Brother Hayes taught, then finding text to that showed that progression, and then I read the book that verifies this, and then I go, okay, now what else might be here? So we're zooming out, re-looking at this text, and then this kind of emerges. Okay, so I want to talk through this because the more that I study on this, the more prominent it becomes as I deal with and I think back through counseling scenarios, that I go, oh man, I wish I would have had known that when I was dealing with this or that, because these, okay, we have a tendency to isolate issues and think we need an isolated answer for this isolated issue. And we don't always see how those issues interconnect and weave into a bigger fabric, okay? And so when you start seeing this, you start seeing this weaving together into this larger fabric here. And I could take, as a matter of fact, as we look at this here and look at what we've already got up here, maybe y'all can already look up here and go, oh, I see where this dynamic would fit in over here or there, right? Anger dynamic up here, and various different things. These other dynamics fit into this structure. They're not to be isolated from the structure. Okay? Once you start seeing that, it will change how you counsel. Okay? Because you're no longer looking at this isolated thing over here. How do I know about this only thing over here? And now you're looking at it in the big view, and you can zoom in on things and zoom out, and see how these things are interrelated. Things where before, when you're counseling, this is what happened when I first started counseling, is like they have this issue and they had that issue. And so I'm dealing with them as if they were unrelated, but they're not unrelated. They're all part of the stew, okay? And understanding that is a very big leap forward in your comprehension in counseling, okay? You have a question real quick?
Yeah. It kind of sounds like
Is that mic on?
Yes. I don't know if it sounds back there, but it kind of sounds like if you were to, say you had like a shoulder issue, or your neck was hurting, and you went and saw like a neck specialist, or a heart specialist if your chest was hurting, and they're looking for a heart issue, and then if like you went to like even a general practitioner or something, and you're looking at it from different angles and seeing how, sometimes if you have a pain in your neck, it's connected to your back or different areas.
It referred pain.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. That can be an issue. All right. Anything from y'all? Okay, let's take a quick break, 5 minutes, and then we'll start back up again, and we'll get into this here. Can you make sure, Keith, that
Test, test, test. Is that too loud out there? No? Okay. Yeah, it's going back there really, really good all the way up. Test, test, test.
I had it for all the theology classes.
Yeah.
Every theology class we took.
Yep, he did. He still does, I think.
The Bible college I went to in Arkansas, we did a whole semester was one,
He likes this
like a
one.
half of the book.
Carter.
So here, it's
Hey.
you get the whole book in a
Hey.
semester.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, yeah, I've already
See if
had
they'll
4
stay quiet.
semesters of it. And they're like, really? So you're done? Like, no, I've only done 2 books.
All right. And we have advanced studies here.
Oh,
Let's get into this destructive thinking chart. We're going to work our way through this, and I don't want to rush this because this is so important. And I think when we talk about youth counseling, this right here is a big thing you need to get, because to track what you're seeing and why it's being produced. Okay, so go in your Bible over to Genesis, there, chapter number 4, and we're going to refer back and forth from here, and also we're going to be in Romans chapter 1. We could literally take this and just lay it over so many different passages. It's insane. But we see there in Genesis 4, in the process of time, verse number 3, came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering to the Lord. To Abel he also brought the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof, and the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Let's start with expectations here. This is what happens first. He expects God to accept his offering. And when we think about that, we might say, well, maybe he didn't know any different. But we know that God already established what the offering should be. We also know that this is in the process of time. Cain by this time it's not just Cain as a child. He's not a child here. He's a man. He's out working in the field. Okay, so he's who knows how old he is at this time. He may be a couple hundred years old when this happens. We're not told how old he is or anything like that. We're just saying in the process of time. At some point, knowing what the offering should be, he decides he's going to bring his own offering, and he puts this expectation out here that God's going to accept my offering. Now, we could go into all this structural details. We've talked about in many other places, many other classes about expectations of Jeremiah chapter number 17, verse number 5 through verse number 8, right? Cursed is the man that puts his trust in man, that maketh flesh his arm, whose heart departeth from the Lord. He shall be as the heath in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, and all those things, the problems that come from expectations, versus the blessings in verse number 7 and 8. Blessed is the man whose hope the Lord is, and he'll be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. So you got this contrast, putting your trust in men versus putting your trust in God. Notice though, Cain's expectation was on God. All right, so he's got this expectation on God, and we know what Psalm 62:5 says, my soul wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is from him. So this expectation from God, meaning that God said I could have this expectation, versus an expectation on God, I decided God should do what I want. Now that statement I just made is a key thing to understand. I decided God had to do what I want. Now who's God? Please think about that for a second. Who's God in this equation? Cain, by his expectation, elevated himself above God. He said, God, you either do what I want or you'll incur my wrath. Wait a minute, isn't it the other way around? We obey God or we incur the wrath of God against sin? But Cain flipped that upside down. He said, no, you're going to obey me or you'll incur my wrath. You're going to do what I want or you'll get my wrath, and you'll receive my indignation against you. So what Cain in this issue of expectation does is he essentially elevates himself to the position of God. Now, when I taught on this in July, and that was the first time I taught on this, I had someone ask me about, well, what about like a church should be able to expect that their pastor, has that their pastor, meets the qualifications in Scripture and so forth. And I said this to him, but I didn't know how to explain it properly at the time, so I've had more time to think this through explanation-wise. I said to him, no, that's not an expectation we're talking about here. That's a qualification. Those aren't the same things. Expectation and qualifications aren't the same things. Let me explain why. Because I don't feel like I explained that well at that time. Qualifications are institutional. They're at an institutional level. Okay? The church is an institution established by God. Since God established the institution of the church, he has the right to set qualifications for who holds its offices. The family is an institution established by God, and likewise, God established the institution of the family. He has the right to set the qualifications of who qualifies as a husband, who qualifies as a wife. See, that's the problem with our culture, trying to say that women can marry or men and men can marry, is that the culture didn't establish the institution of marriage. God did. The culture doesn't have a right to change the qualifications. So when we change the qualifications, what are we doing? We're putting ourselves in the place of God.
Right.
But when we talk about expectations, we're not really talking about that, because a person either meets the qualifications or they don't. There's no reason for me to get really angry about it. It's God's institution. And if I'm part of the institution here in Beth Haven Baptist Church, which I am at Beth Haven Baptist Church, as a member of Beth Haven Baptist Church, I have a right to say, hey, that person doesn't meet the qualifications. But to be angry about them not meeting the qualifications would be that I put myself in a spot where I'm now in charge. I'm the one setting the qualifications. But I don't set those qualifications, God does. So there's qualifications. That's an institutional thing. There's also responsibilities. So a pastor has a responsibility to preach the word, to study to show himself approved, to be a witness, to pray. These are responsibilities we see outlined in Scripture or given in Scripture for a pastor, right? Paul, talking to Timothy and to Titus, gives different responsibilities. They're not qualifications. In other words, the qualifications are very specific, but the preach the word isn't one of the qualifications, it's one of the responsibilities. Now again, God, being the founder of the institution, has a right to give us the responsibilities. But if someone's not doing that, keeping that responsibility, or they don't meet that qualification, who do they answer to? They answer to the one that established the qualification or the responsibility. They're going to answer to God. They don't answer to me. Now, I may, as an individual, say, I can't sit under this ministry because this person does not meet God's qualifications, or they're not fulfilling their responsibilities that were given by God. But they don't answer to me. They answer to God. And so to use the idea of expectation like we would normally use it here is not the same, because expectations require someone to answer to me. This is what we see with Cain. God, you're going to answer for this. Okay? So if I approach the qualifications as if this person had to answer to me, I have put myself in the place of God, but that's not how qualifications should be viewed, and that's not how responsibilities should be viewed. And even within the home, my responsibility in the home to provide for my family, to do the things that as a husband that I ought to do, or my wife to keep the home and those type of things. Those are responsibilities given by God. And when I make it an issue, you're not keeping your responsibilities, and I now say you have to answer to me for that, as opposed to you have to answer to God for that, I'm putting myself in God's place. I'm the one that's wrong. But really, when we say expectations, what we would typically mean here is this. The person that's sitting in the pew that says, I expect the pastor to know that I went in the hospital last week and he never came and visited me. And you go, did you tell us that you went in the hospital? No, but you're the pastor. You're supposed to know those things. That happens, like, stupidly all the time, right? Now, what is that? Is that a qualification? No. Is it a responsibility? No, there's not a single Bible verse that says pastors are supposed to visit people in the hospitals or somehow supernaturally know people are in the hospitals. All right. Now, I'm for visiting people in the hospitals. I'm for visiting, and doing those things. But I'm just saying that's not even a biblical responsibility if we want to get technical. So when someone puts that expectation on the pastor, now they are saying, I have the same right God has. This is a very important connection point, understanding here when we talk about this expectation, why it's so serious. Because you're saying, I have the same right God has. You not only have to answer to God, you also must answer to me. I am putting myself over you as your authority to whom you must answer. Okay? Now expectations become sin. I put myself in God's place. That's what Cain did. Cain put himself in God's place and said, no, God, you answer to me. You do what I want. You do what I say. Okay? So there's a level of extreme narcissism that we might associate here in that sense with expectations. Okay? There's this sinful construct that says, I am at the level of God in your life. And I am the one in sin. This is why, see, the expectation isn't a sin for the person that doesn't keep it, it's a sin for the person that places it. So in my home, I might say, I am angry that you're not submitting, right? Well, here's what the problem is that when I allow that to be my expectation instead of God's responsibility, I say you must answer to me for something that technically you're supposed to answer to God for. Okay, now I'm putting myself on the level of God. So I've made that responsibility into an expectation, but it should never have been. This is what I didn't properly explain back in July. Can someone make a qualification an expectation? Yeah. But what do they do when they do that? They put themselves in God's place. Can they make a responsibility an expectation? Yes, they could, but that's the same thing. You're putting yourself in God's place. Or any other thing that you put on someone and you say, you answer to me. I am your God. I am the one. You must appease my wrath. Okay? And so now I'm in the place of God. That is important to understand. Because in essence, we can draw this back now. Draw this expectation thing back a little bit further now with understanding that. Okay? What is the expectation? It's the violation of the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Because once I start putting expectations on others, I am declaring myself their God. I'm in his place. And guess what's going to happen? I'm going to be cursed. Right? Because I put myself in the place that only God should possess. And I say, you have to please me. You have to appease me. And otherwise you'll incur my wrath for your sin. Your sin is what? Your sin is breaking my commandment on you, thereby breaking my expectation of you. Okay. This breaking of that first commandment on my part by placing expectations on people is the foundational destructive thought. Okay, now we could go back to Adam and Eve and we can certainly evaluate, and we should evaluate Adam and Eve in this regard concerning their sin, okay? But the problem with evaluating Adam and Eve is that it's not completely a proper simulation. Case study. Why is it not a complete case study? Because they were in a world that had no sin in it. They didn't have sin in their flesh yet. Okay? So that case study is important to understand from a theological perspective, certainly, and from a practical perspective of how Satan manipulates and deceives and all of those type of things. But to understand a proper case study concerning the effects of sin on the thought life, this is where we start. And so the effect of sin on Cain's thought life brought him to the point where he said, God has to answer to me. I am in charge. I set the rules. And if you don't do it the way I want, I will be angry. And that is absolutely something that you see magnified from this big, right? That little toddler, that 2-year-old, is like, no, Mom, you're going to do what I want. You know? No, Dad, you're going to do what I say, right? And I'm putting my foot down. And if you don't do what I say, I will fling myself on this floor. I will scream at the top of my lungs. I'll embarrass you. I'll fight you, right? I'm in charge. I am God. Everyone must obey me. Okay? And that's exactly what that thought process is. Everyone must obey me. When you get that, man, that is huge in the process here, okay? So, what happens next? Well, the expectation is broken, and then there comes justification, right? And we're justifying ourselves. We don't know what that conversation in the field was like, but I guarantee, I can almost hear the conversation. It's like, well, you know how hard I worked to make all that? And you know what I was trying to do was bring something that was personal. That's all I was trying to do. I was trying to do something for God that was different than what everyone else is doing. He gets the same thing from everybody else. I was bringing something unique, you know. And how could he not accept that? And there's justification. And if you had not brought that lamb again like you always have, then God would have accepted my offering, and it's and now it's blame shifting, right? So I'm justifying why I did what I did, and then I'm shifting the blame over here onto this person, and it's really their fault. And ultimately, not only does Cain try and shift the blame to Abel, but he also shifts the blame to God. And when you look at here, verse number 14, he says, "Thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth. My punishment is greater than I can bear," in verse number 13. I am so the victim here, you know. Just because I did this little thing of bringing a bad sacrifice and murdering my brother, you know, this little stuff, and you're judging me unfairly, you know. So we've got this expectation, and then the justification, and then the blame shifting. And my goodness, oh my goodness, in counseling, justification, blame shifting. It's like, I wouldn't be angry if my wife would do this. I wouldn't have, I wouldn't act this way in the house if he didn't do this, and this is pointing, it's justifying and pointing the blame, and it's all going around like this, and it's everybody else's fault. And so then it shifts here, and it's either going to, we can do both, all right? We can do both, but there's the internal side of things, and then there's the external side of things. So the internal side of things follows this path. There's unthankfulness that leads to self-focus. Because we're not thankful for what we have and what good has been done, we become self-focused on we have to get more. We have to get even. We have to, everyone's against me and all this type of stuff. Now, then take your Bible from Genesis 4 over to Romans 1 and just notice this. It's unbelievable how parallel so many passages are in this process. Okay? Romans 1. Okay. You start in verse number 17. the righteousness of God is revealed. Verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed against those who, against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. In other words, they knew what was right. They just chose to do something different. Hold the truth in unrighteousness. This is where that expectation part starts with Cain. He knew it was right, but he chose to do it his own way. He put himself in God's place, okay? Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. Now, the truth, according to this, verse 19 and 20, truth is observable both in natural observation and revealed observation, being the visible things from the creation of the world. And truth is rational. It says it's being understood. So they understood. Cain understood exactly what he was doing. He understood exactly what he was doing. He just rejected God's word and decided to do it his own way and pose this expectation on God, right? And then in verse number 21, he says, neither were thankful. They knew God. They glorified him not as God. Neither were thankful. Now notice that connection there, because the next thing that happens is they became vain in their imaginations. Now, I know that we often use this word vain, and we say, well, vain means empty. And that's true, but what else does vain mean? You're so vain. What does it mean? Self-focused. They became vain in their imagination. Not just empty, they became focused on themselves. And that becomes very evident. I think it's important to understand that, because when we read this passage, if we just use the word empty here, we miss the context of what he goes on to say, because their foolish heart was darkened, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. And later we see there that they worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So their vanity of imagination was focused on themselves. And they became worshipers of self. And that's the key when we talk about self-focus. We're not just talking about thinking about the things that we need in a general sense. We're talking about the fact that we have now elevated ourself into that position of God. And we might say, well, most people don't actually think that. No, they do. That's the problem. They do by this wicked thinking put themselves above God. That's why they have no problem violating the law of God. That's why they don't care what the Bible says about it. They're going to do what's right for them. Right? That's why they do worship themselves. And I need my rest, preacher. I mean, I work hard all week to provide for myself. And then on that one day a week that I have off, I need my rest to rejuvenate my body, right? Because it's about me. I'm the most important thing. And they're worshiping and serving themselves. They're worshiping and serving the creature more than the Creator. That imagination, that vain imagination. See, and go look through the scriptures on this issue of vanity. And oh my goodness, it's so prominent in the scriptures, this issue of vanity and the destructiveness. But where does it come from? Well, notice the link here between their broken expectations and justification and that unthankfulness. They neither were thankful but became vain in their imagination. So I begin to put myself in the place of God in my expectations of others, and then I'm unthankful because they're breaking my expectation. I'm unthankful for anything they do that is right. I'm unthankful for any positive thing in them. And I begin to elevate myself even more into the throne of God. Okay? And this is that wicked, prideful establishment of the cult of me. Worship me. I worship me, and you should worship me by doing whatever I tell you, by keeping my expectation. And so I'm unthankful for any good that you do, because you should do that. It's crazy. I'll say, isn't there anything you can give thanks for about your wife? Well, what do you mean? Well, does she do the laundry? She's supposed to do the laundry. Well, does she clean the house? She's supposed to clean the house. That's what wives are supposed to do. I'm not thankful for something she's supposed to do. That's what she's supposed to do. Why would I be thankful for that?
It's a reasonable service.
Come on. It's absolutely a reasonable service because I'm God.
Right.
And they're not going to say, I'm God. But that is what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's how they think. Okay? It's the thought process here. And you can go on down here. Now, look, self-focus in verse number 23, 24, 25. Then jump down to verse number 28. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. This is that victimhood thinking of how dare God not recognize my importance, my significance. How dare that person not recognize I'm a victim? Everyone's against me, right? This issue here, when you lay Saul in this channel here, okay, and you see Saul's expectation that he's going to have the kingdom forever, and him justifying why he did what he did with the Agagites, and then he's blame shifting. It's because Samuel. It's because you weren't here. It's because the people said this. It's because of that. And then he's unthankful for what God has done in his life, and he's going to retain. It's his kingdom. It's my kingdom forever. I'm entitled to it. I'm entitled to it. Okay. And that entitlement is where this sexual perversion stems from, by the way, and then the victimhood comes in. Okay, so if you were to draw a line between entitled and sexual perversion, look at the connection here. The self-focus, and then in verse number 26, for this cause God gave them up to vile affection, even their women did change the natural use of that which is against nature, and likewise the men also, leaving natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which was meat. And I've sat with folks, and this is a thought process. I've had this expressed in counseling. Okay, when I say, when you look at people and you lust after them, what is it that you think? And I had someone say this. I think it's there for me. Say that slower. It's there for me. I'm entitled to it. Right? I deserve it. I deserve that. I deserve their body. I deserve to lust after them. I mean, I have bad things in my life I'm having to deal with. I deserve this. Okay? Ravi Zacharias, when it came out after he died, it came out all the filthy things that he had been doing. And the testimonies of the women he had molested and abused. Okay? And consistent in their testimony was this statement: I have such a hard ministry that God has put on me, that God has given me this exemption, and it's okay for me to do this. I'm entitled. Okay? All right, hold your place there in Romans 1, but look back to Genesis chapter 4 and notice this same thing. Later in the chapter, verse number 19, Lamech took unto him 2 wives. This is the first sexual deviant. He's the first one to pervert God's plan of one man and one woman. It follows right after the account of Cain. Okay? And notice what else is present in his life. In verse number 23, Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken to my speech. I have slain a man to my wounding, a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. I'm a victim, and anyone that comes against me, I'll get vengeance against them. Far more than, I'm a bigger victim than Cain was, and I deserve more vengeance than Cain got. All right? Look what's on this side here. Self-focus, victimhood, vindication. And the connection here, that entitlement. I deserve 2 wives. Why shouldn't I have 2 wives? Well, why shouldn't I have this lust? Why shouldn't I have that lust? I lust for it. If God didn't want me to have it, he wouldn't have given me the lust. I'm entitled to it. I've had people say that type of stuff. Okay? And it's insane, the thought process, but this is what we see. We see this flow. It's very evident in the life of Cain, in the life of Saul, in the book of Romans here. Okay? And you can go on in Romans from that victimhood to extreme thinking in verse 29 through 31, filled with fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, and all that. And then in verse 32 to vindication, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Now think about that back to relationship to Genesis chapter number 6. Because Cain departs from the presence of the Lord here in chapter number 4, verse number 16. But by the time we get to chapter number 6, it tells us this, that in verse 5, God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And later he says that the whole earth was filled with violence. The earth is corrupt in verse 11, and before God, and the earth is filled with violence. What is that? Well, that's Cain. That's Cain thinking. What was Cain's vindication? It was that he got everybody to think like him except for Noah. By the time we get to chapter 6, Cain has had his vengeance against God because God has to wipe the whole earth out. Now think back to Romans 1. Not only do them, but have pleasure in them that do them. They become solicitors for wickedness, for sin. They become, this is the end of this process. A person that gets wrong crosswise with God doesn't generally end with just going into sin. They become groomers of others into sin. They become drawers of others into sin. And by the way, that's the purpose, a reason for church discipline, because when a person reaches this level of sin, that they refuse to repent, they refuse to humble themselves to God, if they're allowed to stay in the church, what's it say in 1 Corinthians chapter number 5? A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. And so there's going to be a infection into others. They're going to draw others into their sin. That's why discipline has to take place. It has to be rooted out and removed. Okay, that grooming and such, and it's very rare that we have had to discipline someone out of our church. But what they did not, as they were going, try and take as many people as they could with them.
You kind of.
It's expected almost by us, and I warn the church, and yet they'll still get a few. Right? Why? Why do they do that? Why are they still persistent? Sometimes years after the issue, and they're still not right, and they're still persistent trying to reach in. They're still trying to reach in. Why? Vindication. I am right, and I will prove I'm right by getting people to follow me. Okay, go ahead.
It just popped in my head, about, you think about just even Lucifer leaving heaven, and the same, self-focus. I don't necessarily know, you could maybe point
Sure,
to
he was
victimhood.
unthankful
Yeah.
for his position with God.
Right.
He was entitled, felt like he was entitled to the throne. He was a victim by having to serve God instead of having his own place, and is trying to take vindication against God. Certainly, every one of those thoughts is satanic.
With him too, so.
Took angels with him. Yep. So this chart pulling down here. Now, I put depression on the outside here because I believe that that's the side that this is most of these things tend to. This expectation, blame shifting, ingratitude, self-focus, and victimhood thinking is the most prominent to produce depression. So these thinking processes, someone comes in and says, I'm dealing with depression. Well, before we jump to this, let's examine it. Have you had a physical? Have you had your thyroid checked? Let's Set up an appointment. Go check. Get your. Don't go to the doctor and get antidepressants. Statistically, this is in that one book, by the way, the book Depression is Contagious. He says this, that studies show that 30 minutes of exercise 3 times a week is as effective at reducing depression as the number one antidepressant on the market. All right. So would it be reasonable to prescribe, hey, between now and next time you come back, I want you to go walk at least 30 minutes 3 times this week? That's a legitimate, reasonable thought. And I can even give you a verse on it. Bodily exercise profiteth little. It doesn't say none, right? Do something. Get some physical work going on here. If they have a sedentary type lifestyle, sedentary job, or whatever, let's get up and start doing some exercise. That'll release some endorphins, right? We know that scientifically, but we also know it does profit a little to have bodily exercise. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's incorporate that into our process. But we eliminate the physical. We eliminate the spiritual. We deal with the question on the spiritual, where are you at, and then now we go, okay, then if these two aren't the case, then the problem is destructive thoughts. Where do we fall in here? Okay. And can I tell you, depression, one of the biggest things you'll counsel youth on. Depression on one side, anxiety on the other. Go ahead.
Do you think, because it wasn't that long ago that I was a teenager, but
It was like last week. Wasn't it?
yeah.
Still look like it.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of times depression for teens is because they don't know what the answer is? Like they know something's wrong, but they don't know how to fix it. And even
I don't think that's exclusively for teens. I think that's for most people. But
just to have a personal example, there was times in my life where even my parents, they'd look at me and be like, why did you do that, or why did you not do this? And I was like, I don't know. Like obviously I made that choice, but I don't know. And they couldn't just look at me and be like, well, I can tell you why you did it. Sometimes they could.
Well, in essence, though, they can, if we're understanding what we're talking about here. Why didn't you do what you were told to do? Mm-hmm. Well, because you put yourself ahead of the authority in your life. Right. You expected to be able to do what you wanted instead of what you were instructed to do. I mean, it still fits the flow.
Right.
If you're 2, it's just 'cause.
Yeah, because I'm a wicked sinner. All right? But this is youth counseling, not toddler counseling, okay? So there's no counseling toddlers. There is no counseling toddlers. Nobody can do that. All right? The rod is the counsel. That's right. All right. All right, so let's consider the other side here. So we go from blame shifting to the external, this problem fixation. Here is where I would apply the meditation significantly. We went over this last night. You guys weren't here, but we talked about it in necessity of meditation in regards to the building a right relationship with God, and having that proper meditation. But problem fixation is improper meditation. That's what it is. Okay, and I can't stop thinking about this thing that happened, or this might, this over here or that over there, and it's like it's meditating on the wrong things. And the only way to fix it is to learn how to meditate on the right things and implement meditating on the right things. Okay, and really, worry, anxiety, those are the things that fall into that problem fixation. Fixated on a problem. I don't know what to do, and so I'm panicking. I'm losing my mind here over this. I'm having a heart attack and all that type of stuff because I don't know what to do. All right. So those things fall here into this problem fixation area. Then, if it's left unchecked, what happens is it moves into problem enlargement. That's where fear and compulsive behavior come in. Okay. So problem enlargement is not just well, if we look at our text here in Genesis, by the way, we see all these things here. Okay, just so you're clear. In problem fixation, my punishment is greater than I can bear. That was driven me out from the face of the earth. And there's this self-focus with all the personal pronouns, but everything centers around the problem, right? This issue. And it's like this fixation on this punishment is the problem, okay? And that fixation there. And then it enlarges when he says, thou hast driven me out from the face of the earth, right? And from thy face shall I be hid. Okay, wait a minute. From the face of the earth, like, that's everywhere, right? I mean, there's nowhere on the face of the earth that you can't go. And from thy face, well, where's God's face not? It's everywhere in the universe. There's nowhere in the universe that you can go. Like, this is enlarged, okay? This is, I use this illustration of the disciples because here they are in the back of in the boat, and the storm's raging, the water's coming in the boat, and they rush back there and they say, Master, there's water coming in the boat. It wasn't, hey, this is a bad storm. Hey, there's water getting in the boat. It's, we're dying, right? And we know that that's not the case because Jesus wasn't floating on the water. He was still laying in the boat, okay? If we're perishing, the boat's gone, right? I mean, this is not the same level of we're perishing. They're still in the boat. He's still in the boat. He's still asleep, okay? And so they fixated on the storm, and then they enlarged the problem, and they took it to this extreme end, right? They took it to the extreme thinking. So we get to that problem enlargement, and then the extreme thinking, we're dying. We're going to die. And so then that problem becomes bigger. There's no solution because the problem's too big. There can't be a solution for this huge problem. It's bigger than God, okay? And now we have to go to the worst possible scenario. And so all of these things tie together here with Cain. And this extreme thinking is evident in that he says, everyone that findeth me shall slay me. Everyone. Not a single person on the earth doesn't want to kill me now. Right? That's a bit extreme, right? And not just everyone will be mad at me, everyone will slay me, right? And so this is extreme. And this is the addiction area, by the way. Now, I put manipulation up here, and that is a big problem that we'll probably talk more about, but I'm not going to do it right here. But this addiction thinking is produced in someone from either this extreme internalization or the extreme externalizing of our focus, and it creates this scenario where we jump to the extreme in everything. I need to lose weight. I'm going to go on a 500 calorie diet. And I'm going to lose weight like nobody's business. Then when I get done losing weight on this 500 calorie diet, the very day that I end my diet, I'm going to go to Swadley's, I'm going to order the Oklahoma sampler and a dozen rolls and the peach cobbler, right? And why am I doing that? Because I'm not on my diet. I can eat however I want now, right? Extremes. And how many times I've seen people, and I'm not talking about people that are hardcore meth addicts or whatever, but just that's their mentality. And that thinking makes you susceptible to addiction. Because what is addiction? It's the extreme for dealing with my problem. It's extreme escape, okay? It's extreme pleasure. It's this extreme, that extreme. And had a guy come in a few months ago into our Hope class, just from one of the apartment complexes next door. He comes one week, he's like, I've been a drug addict and all this. I got clean and I got saved in jail. And now I'm saved and I just got out and I need to be in the program. Okay. So he comes Sunday, Friday night, he comes Sunday night. He didn't come Sunday morning. He had told a friend he'd go to church with them, so he comes Sunday night to church. He comes the next Friday night. He comes Wednesday night again, and then he came the next Friday night. On Friday night, the second night, he's in Hope. He's been in 2 Hope meetings, 2 church services. He says, I heard you have a Bible college. I think God wants me to be a missionary. I'm going to enroll in Bible college. And I said, man, I hope that God does want you to be a missionary. That would be fantastic. So, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Part of addiction is a tendency toward extremes. And you need to get victory over your addiction before you go off to the mission field. The only way to get victory over your addiction is to conquer your tendency to go from one extreme to another. So before you enroll in Bible college, let's just start being consistent, coming to Hope and coming to church. Never came back. Right?
Kiss of death when they say that.
Yep.
I hate for people to even come out like,
Yep. Why is it though? It's because it's an extreme. It's the next extreme. Okay. And they're like, okay. And if they don't learn how to break the extremist behavior, they're never going to truly get victory over that addiction. Those are the people that learn to break the extremism get victory over addiction.
Would you say consistency then is the opposite of extreme?
Diligence and consistency. Consistency. Hey, you do need to lose weight. Start controlling the calories that you eat and start exercising. Well, that won't happen very fast. Exactly. It's healthy. Right? It's sane. Okay. You do need to grow in the Lord. Be faithful to church. Come to Hope. Let's do discipleship. Whatever it is. And be consistent there. You show God consistency, and then God will be able to use you. Right? So, that addiction. And then the last thing over on the externalized side is isolation. And so typically people who get to extreme fear isolate themselves from everyone, right? They're the ones that are still wearing masks right now, right? Yes, walking down the street alone. And they sanitize everything in their house before it comes in. They set it out on the front porch, have to wipe it down with Clorox wipes before it comes in the house, and before long they're completely isolating themselves. Okay, why? Because can't fix the problems, can't get rid of the problems, and so it just, brings destruction that way. Okay, so this flow chart, someone can be on both sides. Actually, we see Cain on both sides of this flow chart. Okay, Saul falls into both sides of this flow chart. Ahab falls into both sides of this flow chart. You think about Ahab. He had this expectation he was going to get that vineyard. He had justification for why. He blamed Naboth for not giving it to him. He's unthankful for what he already had. He was completely self-focused, threw himself on a bed and started crying because he was entitled to it. He was the victim after all, And then on the other side, it's like he's so fixated on that thing and it's so enlarged, no one's going to respect me as a king if I can't even get a single vineyard, right? And okay, so we see the same. I mean, you can lay character after character on this. It's like it just fits so clearly, and it's right here out of Genesis chapter number 4, Romans chapter number 1, 1 Samuel. You name the place, you can just lay it out. Okay, so this chart is our response over here, right? And that response, what does it do? Well, it magnifies this aloneness issue, either creating isolation or vindication. It informs our identity. I am a victim, I am the most important. Everyone should obey me, I do have the biggest problems and or whatever that case may be. So so now we have this framework. This is the rot, okay? This part down here, the rot of the world, the rot of sin and how it impacts us. Now you take this, whatever this is, and then my response to it over here, you throw it in the pot, right? You stir it all up. What's coming out? These are the issues. This is the gender identity. This is the sexual perversion. This is the addiction. This is right? This is what's coming out of the pot. And typically when we get to the point of counseling, we're either here or we're over there. Okay? But you're not going to solve the over there stuff if you don't understand this and can't walk them backward through it. Right? If you don't understand that, unless you understand that and how to apply a proper fix to that, you're not going to solve this other stuff without getting this straight. Okay? So that's why we spent so much time on it here now, laying out this for 6 sessions. All right? Do we have any questions before we take a break here? All right. Oh, you have a question? He's our question man.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions. When you start talking about the opposite of extremes and that, it seems like a issue with teens would be they go to church camp, they make these big decisions, and it's like, I'm going to, radically change my life.
Yeah.
And then they come back and it's there for a week to 2 weeks and then it ends.
Yeah. Absolutely. And they need to learn consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They need to learn to read their Bible every day.
Right.
Be faithful to church. Obey their parents. The things that are no fun.
Right.
That's what they have to learn consistency in.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's take a 5-8 minute break, whatever it'll be. Start back again at just after 5 after. All right. Session 7. Session 7. Gender and sexual confusion. So, I'm going to give you 8 things here that I think are real important that I cover and deal with in this topic. And I'm going to tell you, I have this as one of my future projects to put together curriculum on, but it's not done.
Broken record with you.
I know.
We've seen about COVID.
The problem is that I keep counseling people and it takes up a lot of time, and pastoring people and that takes up more time, and my wife wants time. I'm justifying myself. I'm the victim. I'm the victim. Yeah, absolutely. So, watch out before I take out my vindication on your grade.
Yeah. I'd have to turn to work in again.
All right. So, probably one of the biggest issues we're seeing in our culture right now is this issue, and there's a couple different manifestations here. One of the biggest for the last while was same-sex attraction. That's still a big one. But now add into the mix gender identity issues. When the clinical term for it is gender dysphoria. And it's been in the case books for a long time from a psychological perspective. But it has always been classified as a mental disorder. Until like yesterday, when now all the science, and all the scientists agree. And it's proven. And no one's allowed to argue about it, right? Because it's fact. It's proven. Everyone agrees. Which is how all good science is done, by consensus from top down, right? You agree, don't you? No? Do you agree? Yes, okay. So now you've got, I mean, there's no way to even count how many gender that they're claiming. I mean, it's like hundreds or thousands or millions maybe by now. You know, you've got your trans, and you've got your asexual and pansexual, and you know, I mean, it's just the level of absurdity is unfathomable. But matter of fact, I read something the other day. I read that there are people now requesting surgery to make their anatomy match that of a plastic doll. Mm-hmm. And so they reroute the urethra down to just the bottom area between the legs there, and everything's just flat, smooth, nothing there. I mean, but that's normal, right? That's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no problem there, right? And so we've got this massive amount of confusion in this area of gender, but again, it stems from this issue of identity, okay, and aloneness, and all of these manifestations of everything we see grown out here all come together. And it's important to see that. It's important to see that and know what it is they're trying to solve for. What is it that they're actually trying to solve? They're trying to solve feeling alone. They want to have an identity that means something. And being just a girl doesn't mean anything. Being just a boy doesn't mean anything. You're not special. I need to be special. I need to be unique. I need to be, a cat. Okay. And so we've got to think about this now, though, from all the way from where we started on the very first day on foundations, all the way through all of these other things. Okay, to get to a proper solution, because we're going to have to deal with these bits all the way through. Okay. So the first thing that has to be established when you're dealing with someone that has this issue, and I'm not going to specify distinction here between same-sex attraction, gender identity, all that type of stuff. They lump it all together themselves. Okay, even though they're opposing philosophies, they all have the same end goal, and that is acceptance, identity, And so I say they're opposing philosophies because you can't hold the same thoughts from one to the next. In other words, those that are same-sex attracted, they demand that we accept that they were born that way and they'll always be that way. Mm-hmm. And those that are gender confused demand that we accept that they can be a boy today and a girl tomorrow and a house the day after that, and that it's always changing. Mm-hmm. And both of these things, that it's fixed and changing, both of those things must be true at the same time or you're a bigot. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's not about the perspective. It's not about the view. It is about what are they trying to accomplish. And what they're trying to accomplish is to find a sense of identity that they don't have. Why don't they have it? Well, that whole, everything we talked about before. The last 6 hours of lecture. So, we start at the beginning. When we deal with this, we have to start at the beginning because there's no foundation to build on if we don't. And so what's the beginning? Well, we started with values. And what is the biblical value established on? It's established on truth. So we have to start by establishing what is truth. I taught at a youth camp last year. They wanted me to teach on gender identity. And my entire first message was the quest for truth. It has to be foundational in our approach here. There's 2 different perspectives on truth. There's 2 different aspects to it. I don't even mean perspectives, I mean aspects. There's subjective truth and there's objective truth. Both are in the realm of truth. But we have to understand them in order to be able to have any rational discussion. And yet, at the same time I say that, I know that rational discussion is racist, right? As well, and bigoted, and sexist, and homophobic, and so in order to have any rational discussion, we have to be able to distinguish between subjective truth and objective truth. So when we say subjective truth, we're talking about what is my opinion of something. And there is a level of truth to my opinion in that I believe it to be true. So when we say, hey, HTO has the best tea in town, okay, that's subjective. Someone else might say McAllister's has the best tea, or someone else that's maybe insane might say McDonald's has the best tea. Gold Peak, you'd have to be completely out of your mind to say that, but
That really is like some of the worst.
yeah, it's.
Not even good.
That is kind of pretty bad.
But this is from a guy who likes Taco Bell too. See, so
I used to like it.
yeah. So, so this is subjective truth. Like, I think this is the best. It's the best for me. It is the best to me, it's the best, right? Blue suits are the best, or brown shoes, or, Nikes, or, whatever. It's what I like the best. I think it's the best. And so for me, it is the best, because that's what I think is the best. That's subjective truth. It's really my preference and my opinion. Okay? Objective truth is verifiable. And not just on a statistical who likes it the most, but it's verifiable in that it's always provable. And it doesn't change with opinion or culture. 2 + 2 is 4, not because everyone believes it's 4. It's 4 because it's scientifically verifiable. Math is a science. Okay? And it's not racist to say 2 + 2 is 4, or bigoted. But that's where we are. This is why you hear stupid statements like that. Math is racist. Why do you hear such a dumb statement like that? Because they're attacking the foundation of what is truth. They want to eliminate any objective truth. And that's why we hear the absurd statements. It's part of an indoctrination plan, and if you study out things, for instance, like Rules for Radicals and Marx's writings and all those things, they literally do declare that the more absurd the claim and the louder you should make it, and the goal is to get people to question reality. Because if you can get them to question reality, you can bend reality for them. Okay? There aren't two genders. That's a social construct. Sex and gender aren't the same. Okay, then why does a person who thinks they're a girl have to have a sex change? Well, you're a bigot, right? You're a racist. You're a homophobe. Okay, well, it always goes to ad hominem attacks. So this attack against truth, if we're going to deal with a young person on this area, there has to be an establishment of what truth means. It's foundational. You can't have a rational discussion with someone that has no basis for reality. We're not even talking about the same things. I mean, even if we use the same words, we're not talking about the same things. Okay. What was the phrase I heard the other day? Phrases and words are changing. They're trying to change the meanings of all of them.
No cap.
No, that wasn't it. Boy, I've lost it. And it used to mean one thing, now it means to be angry. Goodness. But it used to mean like I don't know what to do about that. But now literally they changed it to being angry. And it was this conversation between two people, and one of them said this, and they're like, well, why are you so upset about it? And they're like, what do you mean upset about it? Like that was, but it's these phrases and words, they're constantly trying to change them to mean something different. And why? Because they don't want us to be able to talk to each other. And that's really what it is. They want the young generation and the older generation to not be able to communicate.
Yeah.
Okay, so the young generation, they're pushing P, no cap, for real, I mean, and the older generation is like, are you speaking English? Do you, and so, I mean, there's this dividing of the language. Well, part of that dividing of the language is a reconstructing of what truth means, so that my truth, and that's the phrase now, okay, and it's been that way for a while, my truth is equivalent to all truth. My opinion is equal to every truth, because all truth is just someone else's opinion. You only say 4 + 4 is, or 2 + 2 is 4, because that's your opinion. But my opinion is just as valid as your opinion. Understand that? Now we've removed objective truth. We've made all truth subjective. And anything that's not subjective truth is racist and homophobic and bigoted and white, which is the worst slander you can put on someone, right?
I'm all buying it.
Stinking Caucasians.
That's honestly, that's where we are right now, okay? And it is an attack on the foundation of value, character, discipline, and God. Why you say it's an attack on God? Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Cleanse your heart in obeying the truth. Right? Over and over again, the word truth, 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 truth. It's synonymous with God and Scripture. In him is no lie. Right? God, who cannot lie. He is the truth. Okay? He is the essence of truth. He is the giver of truth. Everything he says is truth. Right? He was full of grace and truth. Okay? And so now, if truth is just your opinion and my opinion is equal, then my opinion is equal to Scripture. My opinion is equal to God, because my opinion is truth. And how dare you and who are you to say it's not truth? So what has to happen is the absurdity of it has to be pointed out. Now, this is the same thing that we talk about when we talk about apologetics, and we were talking about that earlier in a break. Apologetics is, in essence, advanced soul winning, advanced personal evangelism, okay? And it's important that a person, if you're going to, for instance, win a Hindu to the Lord, or a Buddhist to the Lord, or a Muslim to the Lord, you have to be able to show them that what they believe about something isn't sustainable in its own self. This is by definition what has to happen in order to convert someone to Christ. Okay? They have to see the inconsistency, the irrationality, and the unsustainability of their worldview. Now, when we're talking about someone who is dealing with gender identity, same-sex attraction, and whatnot, they have to see that in their worldview. They have to see the absurdity of it. How do you do that? Well, first of all, the discussion about truth has to become practical and real for them, okay? And you have to explain the difference between objective and subjective. See, they believe in objective truth, they just don't want to acknowledge it. What do you mean? How do they believe in objective truth? They believe stealing's wrong if it's their stuff. They believe that, rape is wrong if it's them or their friends. They believe that, these things. They believe these things, But why? Why is it wrong? Is it just because you believe it to be wrong? Or is there something else that makes it wrong? Is there something more foundational upon which right and wrong is established more than just your opinion? Is there something that we can draw from that's not just public opinion? What if next week public opinion said rape is okay? As a matter of fact, here's the absurdity of this philosophy. Since October 7th, there are people proclaiming in the streets of America that rape is okay as long as you're an occupied people. Yeah, like the Palestinians.
Yep.
That raping is a legitimate form of protest. There are circumstances under which rape is justified. There's people in the streets in America proclaiming that. Right? Why? Because there is no foundation of truth in their mind. It's all relative to the circumstances. And if circumstances warrant it, then it's okay. It's relative. Okay? So the absurdity of that has to be brought out. And there has to be an agreement upon which we establish truth. We have to come to an agreement of what is going to be considered objective truth. You can still have your opinions, right? I'm not trying to take your opinion away about Taco Bell, okay? That's your opinion that it's Mexican, that it's food. That's your opinion, okay? But at the same time, there are things upon which we have to be able to establish that, okay, it's not just consensus, it's absolute. It's the way it has to be, right? It's objective. It's scientifically provable. Math, science, biology, biologically, that falls into that category. You understand why this is so important? They're out there saying there is no such thing as boys and girls. Okay. And they say, there's also a gender pay gap.
Yeah.
See, we could solve the gender pay gap tomorrow if all the men would declare themselves to be women. And if it is a matter of gender pay gap and there is no such thing as gender, then a woman would be smart to just declare herself a man at work. Then they'd have to pay her the same.
Homosexuals actually make more money than straight people.
That's right, actually.
I just looked that up the other one.
Yeah. And per capita, women make often more money than men per hour at jobs. They just don't work the number of hours and so forth. So it's an absurd thing. The women's soccer team makes more percentage of revenue by like 3 times than what the men's soccer team makes. So, it's all a game. It's all a game they play to divide and confuse. Okay, but the absurdity of it is there's a gender pay gap, but there's no such thing as gender. Right? A boy can be a girl. And men can menstruate, and all that dumb. I mean, it's absurd. But why is it believed? They believe it. I mean, they do. The young people, they're believing these. Absolute absurd lies. Why? Because no one's pointing out to them in a constructive way, not just mocking them. In a healthy, constructive way, what you're saying is not sustainable or verifiable. It's not reasonable. And before you get to anything else, you have to come to a place of agreement on objective versus subjective truth. Because if not, you're not even going to talk about the same things. There's no point in talking about all the other stuff unless we can settle that we're going to go with objective truth as a foundation for discussion. Okay? So that's the first foundation or first step in dealing with this issue. All right. The next step is labels. Why is it the next step? Because the core issue is an identity issue. It's the fruit on the tree up there. Okay? It's an identity issue. And the label is something to give me identity. That's what it is. It's to give me an identity. Now, from Scripture, we know this. When Jesus came across to the sea, across the Sea of Galilee, or the Gadarenes, he met the man that was possessed of devils, and this man, he asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now, we know most likely that wasn't his given name. It was his sinful identity, right? It was the description of how he saw himself, and it was the description of his sin. And that's the interesting thing about the modern, it's like I want my sin to be my identity, right? So I'm going to wear apparel that shows my identity, right? I'm going to flaunt my identity. I want it out. I want everyone to see my identity, especially in this area of sexual deviancy. And don't for a minute think that the reason that this is being put, I'm going to tell you this, okay? The reason they're pushing all of this and they're justifying all this is because they're pedophiles. And that is the underlying motive behind this. There's no doubt in my mind at all about that. The pedophile, if they can get society to accept that a 5-year-old should have the right to mutilate and cut off their genitals, then there is no reason at all that a 5-year-old shouldn't be able to choose to have sex with an adult. If a 5-year-old has the legal right to decide what to do with their genitals, then they can do anything they want with them. And that is exactly where they're headed. And it is publicly being stated now. Okay? The perversion in our world, in our culture, is just unbounded. Okay? So it's this labeling that is intended to produce identity. If I declare myself non-binary, or even those that aren't, they'll use this, I'm cisgendered. It's the absurdity of saying cisgendered. Cisgender is a slur. It is a slur. It's intended to demean being natural affectioned. Okay. The declaring of your pronouns. So you've got girls out there and boys out there that literally they're saying, I'm cisgender, he, him. You don't have to tell me you're he, him. You're a man. You don't have to tell me you're she, her. And there is nothing else. Right? We need to establish truth. That's where we already were. Why do you need to tell me pronouns? Why do you need to tell me your sexual preferences? Why? Because that's your identity. That's what they're driving for. This is who I am. Now, why does that matter? Because if you reject this, you reject me. And that's absolutely what the point of it is. See, Satan has convinced these young people that if someone doesn't accept your sexual identity, then they are rejecting you personally. Because you are a sex object. You understand? That's what you are. You are a sex object. Everything about you is reflective of your sex desires. And that's all you are. Because you're not created in the image of God. You're just a beast, an animal that has desire, and whatever you desire, whatever your appetite is, you should just fulfill it. And they started teaching this in the colleges decades ago. You're nothing more than an animal, and whatever you have an appetite for, you should satisfy it. And the sexual deviancy became insane in colleges. And those are the people that are now teaching college, whose sexual deviancy and appetite for perversion has come into absolute insanity. But that's all you are. You are your lusts. You are your appetites. It is your identity. And so now we demand then support. You must accept, you must support my sexual choices because it's who I am. And if you don't, then you deny me as a person, and that is violence. That's how words become violence. You're doing violence against me because you're rejecting my identity. This is who I am. And if you don't accept who I am, then you hate me. See how Satan's twisted the mind up here, twisted the language up here, twisted all of these things, and everything has become about lust, and everything has become that this is who I am. I am my sexual desires. How dare anyone? Okay, I told Brother TJ this earlier. NPR today released a story in which they attacked groups that are trying to help people stop looking at pornography by calling all these groups that are trying to help people stop using pornography bigoted and with ties to bigoted and hate groups. What? Pornography is destroying marriages and families and children, and our young people right now are not marrying. They're not. I read an article the other day on a secular view that says this current high school generation is having less sex than any previous recorded generation. Think about that. And it was as if this was a bad thing, and that's an interesting statement that would be a bad thing, but here's the reality. It's bad in the sense of why. Mm-hmm. And the reason that they got into of why is because they're all hooked on porn. And that the idea of natural sex is not appealing to them because it can't reach the attainment of what they're already viewing and imagining. And not just boys, girls. And it's about to get worse. Apple just released their VR headsets. And I'm going to tell you this, without doubt, the number one thing that's going to be viewed on those things, porn. Mm-hmm. Virtual reality porn. And it's going to take from They say the magnitude of addiction from magazines to videos is like 10 times. It's going to be exponentially higher than that for VR.
You can already have AI girlfriends.
It's going to be out. I'm just telling you, we're not, it can't possibly be that the Lord's return is not soon. Because we are absolutely going to wipe ourselves out just from the fact that we're not going to repopulate. It's just absolutely insane. Okay, it's the label. Okay, it's the label, and it's the defamation of anyone that doesn't approve of you. It's the defaming. How dare you not approve of me? You bigoted hate monger. Everything you think is wrong, and you are rejected from me because you don't accept my sexual identity. All right, and it's not just how the extremists think. It's what they're teaching people to think.
Yeah.
So when you deal with that teenager, they've been taught to think this way, and so you've got to be careful. In counseling, you've got to be careful not to mock absurd thoughts. And I'm just going to be honest, that's difficult. Because these young people are being taught to take everything as a personal offense. And if you start mocking it, you are immediately labeled as a hater and someone who cannot be trusted and should not be listened to. And so you're not going to make any progress. This is where I struggle because my spiritual gift is sarcasm. And so it is a struggle, but it's something you have to keep in mind when you're counseling them in this area specifically. Especially, okay. Okay, so truth is number one. Number two is labels, identity, denial, support, all those type of things. Number three is destruction. Now, what I mean by that is that a person needs to be shown the impact of sin. What does this lead to? Okay. This is where the discussion concerning bringing into the discussion the vast and growing number of people who have had sexual transition surgeries and are detransitioning. You need to do research into that. And what they say about it. There's lawsuits being filed against hospitals and doctors right now in a massive way. They're trying to suppress it in the media. You have to search to find it. But I'm talking, it's massive. And they're trying to demean these people that are detransitioning, that are going back. They're libeling them. They're ad hominem attack and all this type of stuff. It would do you very good if you're dealing with someone. You need to do some digging. You need to get some identification. This is look at these. They're lying to you. They're telling you this is going to solve your problem. But look, here. And these are the ones that haven't committed suicide. Where does this lead? They're telling you that if you transition, then you're less likely to commit suicide. That is not scientifically provable. It is absolutely the opposite. It's the opposite. Okay? And so all of the true science shows us. I read yesterday that the entire Gender Affirming Care Foundation is built on literally 2 pages of study. 2 pages, not 2 reports, 2 pages of stuff. Okay? And that's it. Everything else in every study in every country in the world says this is insanity. But the media and Disney and music industry and entertainment industry is jamming this down the throat of our children. Okay? And they need to see the true destruction of what it is. Okay? And then we need to start exploring the activating events. This is where we start getting into this in a counseling scenario. Emotional pain, the traumas, okay, the failures in family we talked about, right? Failure in the relationship with God, looking for identity in the wrong places, the destructive thoughts dynamic, all of those things. Now, as a counselor, I'm not going to throw all that on them in one session. But we go through the process, right? We go through the question to understand, question to reveal, judge from the word till repentance, then restructure. And we're using these things as a roadmap, if you will, for dealing with the activating events, showing them the progression of sin, showing them where this leads to, and the consequences that are coming. They have to see the end of the disease to begin to recognize the need for a cure. A lot of that falls under that judge from the word portion. And so when we tie in the wages of sin and we show it from a practical standpoint, right? Here's what the wages of sin looks like. Here's what the end of this same-sex attraction. Here's where it actually leads. AIDS. Oh, well, they have pills for that now. There'll be something else.
Yeah, to be undetectable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even tell you how many commercials I see of that. I'm like, oh, man.
Not a cure.
It's not a cure, no.
Just not to be detected, yeah.
But it's just, and if it's not AIDS, it's syphilis, it's HPV virus, it's and genital warts, and any number of other STDs. Okay, it's like all of that stuff. It's part of that lifestyle. Okay, and they need to see the reality of what lies ahead of them. You say, well, what's the biblical basis for showing them that? Well, God shows us what the end of sin is. Right? Sin, when it's finished, bringeth forth death. death and hell is cast in the lake of fire. God warns us about what the end is. So the biblical principle is, look, you need to know where this leads.
Right.
And someone might say, well, you shouldn't get saved just because so you don't go to hell. Well, I think that's one of the dumbest statements I've ever heard, just on a personal basis, because if that doesn't factor into why you get saved, then you probably aren't actually trusting Christ, because why would you need to? It's like, Lord, I'd like you to save me, not just so I won't go to hell. That doesn't matter so much to me, Like, well, that's just dumb. It's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so there's death and hell await those that refuse to turn to Christ, and it's part of why you should get saved. He saved you from death and hell.
Yeah. I think most people get saved to have a relationship with God. They don't realize that.
You need to use a microphone.
Yeah, I think most people don't get saved just to have a deeper relationship with God. That's something that comes and they realize after.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so showing them the progression of sin, the impact of sin, showing them where these activating events took place and how they've manifest. Why do you feel this way? Well, part of it is this progression, right? This happened, and there were things that were missing in your life. It's okay to acknowledge this. It's okay to acknowledge, and important to acknowledge, that there were things missing. You didn't have a good relationship with your dad. You didn't have a good relationship with your mom. You didn't have a good relationship with your pastor. You didn't have a good relationship with God. You've made your peers and social influencers your guides and your counselors. And you went looking for identity in a reflection that was full of flesh, sin, and wickedness. And no wonder when this activating event happened, it produced a turn to these things to try and find a sense of identity. It's reasonable that you did that under the circumstances. But the problem is, God said that He could change your circumstances, and you're not putting your trust in Him. You're trusting in you. You're trusting in the culture. You're trusting in your peers. You're trusting in, and none of those things are going to satisfy. Not until you do it God's way will you find satisfaction and peace. So we have to see the destruction. Okay, so we have to establish truth, what it is. We have to understand labels, identity, what they're looking for. Okay. And then we need to expose the destruction of their current path. Okay? We'll stop for a break, and then we'll pick up at 5 after. I don't know if this is accurate. That clock is not accurate. So we'll take a 10-minute break, basically. All right.
Talk to you next week and you say, hey, brother, I'm sorry, I'm out of pocket.
I'm completely out of pocket. I tried to remember earlier that phrase. It was out of pocket. It used to mean, of course, what it means
Yeah.
is I'm unavailable. But now they're trying to make it to where it means you're angry. Anyway. All right. So we've built structure here. We're building structure. This is session 8, by the way. Truth, labels, destruction. Fourth part, design. Design, how we were created. All right. By this time, if you're going to be successful, you've already established what truth is. You better be using Scripture by this time, right? By this time, I'm showing the identity tree here. I'm using emotional pain dynamics. I'm using other dynamics, right? Genesis chapter number 1 and verse number 26, 27, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. God blessed them. God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over every living thing that moveth on the earth. So, there's a couple important things that we need to take out of this. Number one, our design is unique. In the image of God, the Bible says. We're created in his image. And we're the only part of creation that this is said about. That makes us very special. It makes you very special, personally. Can I say like this? You say, well, I'm no different than all the other people on the face of the earth. People are unique in creation. They're special in creation by God's identity, God's image in us. Okay? And so there's a natural importance in our creation to begin with. But then you add in the distinction male and female. Now this is not only sex, but gender. And there is masculine gender and female gender. But they are distinctly, uniquely tied to male and female. Okay? And a person, and this is important to accept or understand. A person is either male or female. But they may be more or less masculine and more or less feminine. Tomboy. That's a bad term because it implies boy when someone's a girl. But what did it intended to express in previous generations? Well, she likes to climb trees and, play rough games or whatever. Okay? That doesn't change whether she's a female.
Right.
nor does it change the aspects of femininity that are present in her, because I've never ever met a tomboy that didn't have very distinctly feminine attributes as well. A man may be more and less masculine. The Bible calls that effeminate. And at a certain point, it becomes sinful. Why is it sinful? Because it's a denial of who God made him to be. And by the way, a woman not pursuing her femininity can be just as sinful, because it's a denial of who God created her to be. So, well, why you say it could be sinful? Because there are unique blessings inherent in that identification. Now notice that word here in verse number 29. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. That's interesting. We often put the emphasis on the be fruitful and multiply part, but there's a certain implied blessing in each of them in their part in this process. Okay? So when we talk about the destruction side, we understand that the design side, the destruction side removes the blessing of the design side. Okay, a person that has gender reassignment surgery, this is important for them to see. It's important for you to show them this. They will never have sexual climax again. They can't. They literally remove the parts that would be that would have created that scenario. They don't tell them that. But that's absolutely verifiable. Okay. The pleasure that a man would have in sexual congress, a woman who has artificially created those parts will not experience that same pleasure at all. There's no life there. Okay? And vice versa, a man who has his parts removed and created into a female cannot experience the same pleasure that a woman would have experienced. It's not possible.
Not only is it not the pleasure, but they also have to do things daily to keep up.
I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
The sex reassignment stuff in particular, the aftercare is insane. Specifically for a male that becomes a female, if the body literally tries to reverse that procedure nonstop the rest of their life, they have to forcibly keep the openings, and it's painful, like very painful, and that's well documented. The females that supposedly become males, it's grotesque what they actually have. It's not even. It's so unnatural and it's grotesque. Okay. And functionality is very, very bad, very bad. So they lose the blessing. In other words, they lose the blessing of what they were born with. They lose the blessing of the natural pleasure that comes from intimacy. They lose the pleasure they lose the blessing of the fact that I don't have to do anything to keep functional what I already have, right? Now I have all this maintenance that has to be done. They lose the blessing of the potential for their life. A girl who has this reassignment stuff done, and even, by the way, if she doesn't go all the way through with it, simply the puberty blockers for boys and girls can sterilize them. That's actually what it's for. The drugs they give them for gender reassignment are for chemical castration. And so even if they get to the point where they go, I'm not going to go ahead and have this surgery, they may have literally prevented themselves from ever being able to have children in the future, and most likely have. So the absurdity of this, they're stealing the blessing of their creation, of their creator that was given to them by their design. And let me say this. Sex is not just for the purpose of procreation. But biblical sex, or sex that would fall in the confines of biblical relationships, always has that potential. You know what I mean? Other reasons notwithstanding. Okay. When a biological man and a biological woman have intimate relations, if all the parts are functioning properly, and it's not, the time of the month and all that, the natural result would be a child. Okay. You remove that, and what you've removed is part of the blessing. And that statement here, that doesn't mean have all the children. I'm not saying have all the kids you can possibly have. I'm saying the construct here of the blessing and the potential of children is tied together. Okay? And it's not the only reason for intimacy between a man and a woman. But that potential of the blessing there is tied to it. Okay? So anything absent that is unnatural. And the terms that are important are biblical terms. Male and female. I'm not a cisgendered. I'm a male. Okay? My wife is a female. We're not heterosexual. We're male and female. We're not, there's natural and unnatural relations. That's exactly how the Romans frames it. It's natural, that which is against nature, meaning it's not possible for it under any circumstance to result in offspring. It's now unnatural. Okay? So those are Bible terms. I highly encourage you to become very familiar with using Bible terms, because when you're in this conversation, the terminology, if you use the world's terminology, it gives validity to their argument. So don't use their terminology. Male, female, natural, unnatural, blessings. Amen. So design has to be explained. The blessing has to be explained. The intention of God, and then tying that back to the destruction of sin. You realize that what this means is you will never experience the ecstasy of intimacy. And the problem for so many of them is they've believed this lie that the lie is so strong in their mind, okay, that they're willing to give up the blessing for the rest of their life because they're not mature enough to even understand what that means.
Yeah. I
think, even just with the prominence of video games and being able to always hit restart or turn off and, reset, you can start over, and
Right.
nothing's permanent. And because they've disassociated with permanence and and that consequences are
Same with tattoos.
Yeah.
My generation perceived tattoos as permanent. The modern generation, if under like interviews, they don't believe tattoos are permanent.
Because you can remove them.
Yeah.
You always have a scar.
Right. It's absolutely shell game. The devil's played with them. All right. So truth, labels, destruction, design. Number 5, love. This is the original lie that was sold when I was a kid. Love is love. How can you be against love? Right? And if you remember when we talked about the family solution, what was the cornerstone or the pivotal point for all of this? It's love, right? This is what they're looking for, and it's what they're missing. It's what they're missing at home. It's what they're missing. The thing that's so irritating about this whole gender reassignment stuff is that the number of parents that are actually pushing their children into this, it's child abuse, absolute child abuse. So you're not probably ever going to get an opportunity to counsel those children, okay? But you are going to be counseling children in your church that who have friends that have had this and are trying, and that whole vindication side, right? They're being told this at school, they're being told this at various different places, and they're seeing it and they're hearing it, and they're confused. They're confused. And we got to eliminate the confusion. But this love, what is love? And we have to we really have to go through and lay that groundwork with them of first of all, they're never going to truly understand love until they experience the love of God. And until they fall in love with God. And contrasting that with the carnal substitutes that are out there. And I think it's important to understand the connection between love and security. When I feel loved, I feel secure. And when I don't feel loved, I feel insecure. That's why understanding the love of God is a prominent chapter in this book. When a wife feels unloved, she doesn't feel secure in her relationship. When a child doesn't feel loved, he doesn't feel secure in his home. And will grasp for anything that will help him feel secure or her feel secure. Okay? So when this whole idea of, well, love is love, you just love who you love, and it doesn't matter if they're same sex or opposite sex or, you're all this craziness. I saw this thing, this interview. Because I do a lot of research on this stuff when I'm working on it, I watch interviews and various things. I'm trying to think of what it was. Anyway, the interview was a person on the street interviewing a group. It was guys and girls, and it was on the street interview. It says, if a man is dating a trans woman, is he a homosexual? All the men said yes, and all the women said no.
If a man's dating
A trans woman. Did I say that wrong?
No, I think you
so
said
it's
it.
If a man is dating a trans woman, which would be a man who identifies as a woman,
right.
does that make the man a homosexual?
Mm-hmm.
And the men are like, yeah. And the women were like, no. And the person said, why does it make him a homosexual? And the men all answered, because it's a dude. And the women were like, it's a woman. It was the weirdest, surreal, like, but that's exactly what they're pushing. I was like, no, like a man can be with a trans woman and be straight because it's a woman. Right? So, how did I get on that?
Love is love.
Love is love. And security. Okay, love and security are intertwined. But in order to really understand it, you need to understand the love of God. You need to understand the acceptance of God in Christ and so forth. And then you need to understand the love that's to be exemplified in the family, right? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And so that magnification, and Ephesians chapter number 3, where we were when we talked about this up here, that you may know the love of God, okay, and be abound in the knowledge of his love and so forth. So all of those things need to be expressed and learned. Learn what love actually is. Love is not lust. And that's what the world substituted, right? Love is just your sexual appetite. Love is getting from others what you want. Honestly, that's what it boils down to, is that love is getting from them what satisfies or gratifies you. Okay? And there's this wacky perversion that's gone on. So we have to define love, we have to illustrate love from the scriptures, and we have to contrast that with the works of the flesh. And I believe Galatians illustrates this the best, where you see in Galatians chapter number 5, go ahead and turn over there. Is that right? I agree with you, buddy. I agree. That's my grandson talking right there. He must be right. His name's Carter Hayes. All right, Galatians 5. So you see contrasted in verse 19, the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. And he goes on. Verse 22, the fruit of the Spirit is love. Now you can lay out this works of the flesh on one side and fruit of the Spirit on the other, and what you're going to find is there's a correlation in this all the way down. Okay? Love is the godly fruit versus adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. That's the work of the flesh. We know what adultery, fornication, those are clear. Uncleanness is sexual. That you look up that word, it's a sexual implication, and so is lasciviousness, wantonness. They're just other words for lustful gratification. Okay, so this is what Satan wants to substitute. He says, "You don't feel loved? Okay, have sex with men. That'll make you feel loved, because lots of men will want to have sex with you." Right? You don't feel loved? Oh, it's probably because you're not really what your body is. If you were a girl instead of a boy, then you'd feel loved. If you were a boy instead of a girl, then you'd feel loved. Right? It's amazing to me to hear the absurdity of this. God made me a girl, and then God made a mistake and put me in a boy's body. Right? The absurdity. God made the mistake, not you. You're sure you're not mistaken about being a girl? Right? I mean, let's weigh the options here.
Yeah.
God, who's never wrong, versus you. There's a disconnect here, okay? But there again, I am putting myself in God's place, yeah.
A lot of kids don't believe they're wrong.
No, that's what I'm saying.
They have no clue that
They don't. And
they have a sin.
and why don't they? And take this back now to the destructive thoughts. Why don't they think they're wrong?
Because their parents tell them they're perfect.
Okay, that's not the only reason, but it's part of it. But think back to the expectation. What is the expectation? I am God. Right? God is to do what I say.
Right.
It's an extreme narcissism. And you're right. And the parents feed it.
Fed from parents, yeah.
Okay. Yep, absolutely. All right, so this love has to be understood. Now, again, I don't have this curriculum done, so you're going to have to do it yourselves. I do this with people, though. I go through these points. This is exactly how I go through them. And I'll just take Scripture and I'll work through these. All right, number F. 6.
Taking notes with Brother Mac.
Brother Mac, do that?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
He would give an outline,
He'd say,
but it wouldn't be his complete outline.
it'd
So
be 1, 2, D.
it's like, just don't give any of them, but he always would
5,
give it. I'm like,
1.
all right.
All of it.
What, did I just miss all these other points?
Yes.
Brother Ivan goes, why don't you just print it off and give it to us? Those two always went after each other.
That was a fun class.
He sat in there for whatever reason.
What class was it?
It was the epistles,
Oh.
and you just wrote. That's what the whole class was. You wrote his outline the best you could, and then you typed all the notes up. And we did take tests, but I remember there's a ton of notes. He just like, okay.
Literally picked it up and went, and then wrote a grade on it. I was like, I spent hours and hours typing that. Hours. He didn't even look at a page.
It sounds like you need to forgive. You're bitter. You're bitter.
He's gone now. It's all right.
Okay. 6. Perspective. All right, when we see the destruction for what it is, the design for what it is, when we see love for what it truly is, and it's not just our lusts, then what we're starting to do is starting to get a godly perspective. We're starting to see things like God sees them. And what we're doing is we're in practice putting on the fear of the Lord. At this point, I actually emphasize that. Right? This is what we're doing. Because remember this about counseling, is that my job in counseling is to get them to the point where they're following Christ and then teach them to continue doing that, not to be the one that has to make the decisions for them for the rest of their life, counsel them in perpetuity. Okay? So we're transitioning now here into we've rejected the lies, okay? We've realized the label identity issue. We're starting to get our identity in Christ. We've encountered the destruction. We've recognized or accepted the design God made us. Now we're just putting it on, and we're putting on this design. We're putting on this godly intention through growing in our love for Him, and then beginning to see things like He sees them. This is resetting my worldview. Okay, the fear of the Lord really is the putting on God's worldview, seeing things like He sees them, and responding like He would respond. And so, I'm beginning to change. Okay, I'm beginning to change. I'm beginning to identify with Christ instead of my sin. I'm beginning to see how He sees this sin, or how He sees this culture, and this perspective change begins to take place, and that leads then to the next thing, which is the image change. Okay, in other words, what I see and where I'm looking is what I'm becoming. And I'm being transformed, you know. You know, you could go to, for instance, on a negative illustration of that, you could go to Lot. He pitched his tent towards Sodom, and that's where he went, right? His perspective was toward the world, and stop it. His perspective was toward the world, and he went toward the world. Versus, you know, Christ, who fixed his gaze, he fixed his gaze on the cross. You know, I mean, his perspective is here. This is where he's headed. Who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross. You know, I mean, he went that direction by choice because he set his gaze there. Well, so we have to understand that this perspective is going to naturally begin a transformative process. And while it happens naturally, I don't think that it should go without explanation when we're in the counseling process. I think it's good for people to know what's going on in that process so that they can yield themselves to it consciously as well. Okay, let me step back a second because I've primarily been focusing here on the gender identity issue. But when we talk about, for instance, the same-sex issue, SSA is actually the common term that's used, SSA, same-sex attraction. Your approach is the same, establishing truth, recognizing identity, and labels. Okay. I don't like now. I like a lot about Johnny Nixon's book. I'm sorry, Dr. David J. Nixon's book. In the sense of, I think that there's a lot of truth in it, in the idea of, okay, there is no mandate to marry in the scriptures. In other words, there's no command to marry in the scripture per se, okay? It's okay for a person to be single and serve God. You don't have to want to marry. It's okay, okay? And if you don't, the only reason to marry is if you could bring more glory to God married than single, okay? And that's really the motive, you know, 1 Corinthians 10:31, you know, whether you eat or drink, whatsoever you do all the glory of God. If you could bring, if you think, you know, I can bring more glory to God single than married, then you should stay single. And you don't have the burning for intimacy, okay? Now, can I say this? If you have a burning for intimacy, you cannot bring more glory to God single than married. But not everybody has that same, not everyone does. And it's hard to understand if you have it. It's hard to understand how someone might not have it. But it is true that there are people that don't, okay? There are people that, you know, live single their entire life. Paul was single, okay? That's clear in the scriptures. And people might debate saying they think he had been married or whatever. I don't think he had. But he certainly was single. One way or another, he was single, okay? And he was happy about it. He didn't burn, okay? So anyone that says, well, that's not even possible, then you're calling Paul a liar, okay? Jesus was 33 years old and single. Every indication I can tell would say that John the Baptist would have been single. Okay, John the Beloved, single. So to say that every man has to have that same burning is not accurate, biblically speaking. So it's certainly clear that there are eunuchs. Okay, eunuchs by birth, eunuchs by choice, and then eunuchs that are made eunuchs of men, which is what Matthew 19 talks about, those three things. Here's what I think is important, though. I don't think that a person should pursue taking the title, the label, eunuch. I think the label is the label man. Because to take the label eunuch in some fashion demeans or diminishes the masculinity of that individual. And a person can be a eunuch by practice, but still be every bit manly. Okay. And so I think it's important to recognize and then also to make a conscious ascribing of what manhood is, masculinity is versus machoism. Because often the problem in our culture is we don't distinguish between masculinity and machoism. We make machoism masculinity. And machoism isn't masculinity. It's a characterization, right? It's like sitting down at the fair with the guy that's drawing, and he draws great big ears and a huge nose, and you're like, well, yeah, it kind of looks like him, doesn't it? It looks like him. Look at that. I didn't ever notice it. And the nose is like this, and the ears are like this, and you're like, well, it's a caricature. Machoism is a caricature of manliness, right? It exasperates, it makes absurd the some of the features, okay? And so it should not be the grunting and got to kill something to be masculine kind of thing that is very American, okay? That's machoism. But someone who doesn't have a desire to marry should still be masculine or feminine, distinctly. It always amazes me how a person can say, I prefer men or I prefer women. A man says, I prefer men, but they want some feminine man, or a woman wants a masculine woman. It's like they still want those characteristics. Right. Okay, there's deception there. So it's important. I'm saying all this because of having dealt with this issue numerous times now. It's important for someone who has SSA to begin to identify with the natural traits of their sex and gender that are given as blessings from God, and to embrace them. In other words, it's not like they should just say, well, I'm a eunuch, therefore I am not like other men. No, they should still embrace the natural traits. It doesn't mean they have to have a desire to have a wife or have a husband. But they are distinctly masculine and feminine, created by God in that fashion, and they need to begin to embrace that. And here's what I have found. That because they haven't embraced that, that's why they're attracted to it. In other words, they're attracted to what they don't see present in themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it's necessary that they embrace that God made me this way. I don't have to pursue these traits in someone else because God made me a man. So I need to embrace my manhood, my masculinity, okay, and allow myself to be masculine. Right? I don't have to be macho. I don't have to be like everyone else, but I am a man, and it's important to embrace that aspect of who I am, so that I'm not trying to find fulfillment in pursuing those traits in others. And I would say, in the long term, that is so important. It's so key to the victory that they need. It's not just labeling yourself as a eunuch, and now I'm a eunuch, and therefore, no, it is embracing your Creator's design in you. So, funny story, actually, though. We were over in Prague on a missions trip, and this place we went to eat was a traditional Czech food. They had this red kraut. They call it red kraut. And so they brought it. It was sweet. It wasn't sour. It was kind of a sweet red cabbage. And I said to the waiter, I said, I don't think I've ever had that. Is that something just here in Czech Republic? And he goes, yeah. He said, I don't think, and his English was not the greatest, but he said, I don't think they have it in other places. I think we're eunuch in that. And I said, you're what? He said, I think we're eunuch. I said, that's interesting. Not all men would admit that. And he said, but we are. We are eunuch. And I said, all right, I accept what you say. And I had me a good laugh. I didn't laugh in his face, but I went home and I laughed and I laughed and I laughed. We are eunuch. Okay, so I'm kind of backtracking here in this, not backtracking as in going back on what I said about gender identity, but backtracking and trying to make this application here coming forward of, I think it's important when you're dealing with someone who's same-sex attracted, you establish truth. The label is not, it has, I think there has to be a rejection of the world's labels, but I also think that it's important for them to just take the label of man or woman, not eunuch, not as in, because see, eunuch still defines itself by sexual desire. Man and woman isn't a definition of sexual desire. You understand what I'm saying? It is just a state of being. I am a man. Okay? And or you are a woman. That's a state of being. And so to add anything else, I think, is unnecessary in this process. And I think it's somewhat counterintuitive. It could potentially be destructive, okay? Because it's still making the same error of identification based on sexual things. And then embracing the gift of my design, or the blessing of my design, embracing manhood, masculinity, or femininity, and allowing myself to explore that in me, right? I mean, it's something. We take a young man out, we're like, all right, we're going to use a chainsaw. And they're like, oh, no, I don't know. And then they use that chainsaw, and they're like, I can use a chainsaw, and it is an expression of that. And it's something, by the way, a lot of times that comes from a dad, right, to teach his son these things. Well, now you see what we've got is we've got a lot of absent dads, and they're not learning those things, and so there's young men, they don't see that in themselves because they've never been exposed to it. They've never been part of it. And so that design, but then also even important as I embrace the fact that I am a man, I also need to understand that a primary command in my life is love. And so love is not contrary to masculinity. Love is a part of what I'm called to be as a man. I'm called to love. I'm called to love God. I'm called to love my neighbor. If I do choose to marry, I'm called to love my wife and my family, all above myself. And I'm to put on that perspective, God's view of things. I'm not looking at it from the world's view anymore. I'm changing my perspective. I'm changing my worldview. And I'm being transformed into His image. And ultimately, this would be the last thing, number 8, and that is presence, that ultimately the full final aspect of this answer is learning to live in His presence, learning to walk in the Spirit. You're no longer walking in the flesh. You're not walking according to the carnal desires and lusts. You're walking in the Spirit. You're a spiritual being, not a sexual being. You were created to spend eternity with God, not created to have sex on this earth. It's important to get that.
Sure.
Now, there's a certain level of fulfillment that comes with the intimate relationship, absolutely. But that wasn't my purpose in creation. My purpose in creation was to walk with God. And that's where the greatest fulfillment in life actually is. It is in that learning to really walk with God. And that is significant in our life when we put everything in its proper place. So that's the culmination of this, is that we're through with this counseling, we're finishing this counseling, that they're moving forward, recognizing what it means to actually walk with God. And that becomes a prominent part of their focus and desire. All right? I get asked this, have I counseled people that have been same-sex attracted and had success? Yes. The answer is yes. These are the steps we took. Multiple people, by the way. Have I counseled people that have had gender identity confusion? Yes. And had success? Yes. These are the same steps. Okay. So I know that this works. It's not just theory. But I will say, when you're counseling these topics, you need to be very compassionate. You need to be very deliberate. And you need to be very patient. This is not something, even though I went through all this in the last 2 hours, this is not a 2-hour conversation with someone who's dealing with this. This is potentially, it could be months. Okay? And there may be many veins of things that we deal with in the process. Okay? Depending on what rot has impacted them, what home life was like, going through the insecurity book, going through the emotional pain book, going through these different things is part of the process. So you say when, every one of them's different. Every situation's unique. So you've got to approach it in a distinctly unique manner. So, all right. Any questions before we go tonight? we will not meet tomorrow because tomorrow's Wednesday. So Thursday, we will meet, and what we'll do is what we're going to do, you have that thing Friday night, so we'll skip Friday night, we'll do Thursday night, we'll do Saturday morning. Okay. And I'm certain that it'll take us, I'm looking at my notes now, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's going to take us a full night to do these parts, and then at least a couple sessions, maybe probably 4 sessions, 8 to noon on Thursday is probable. I mean, it's Saturday morning. Yeah. Okay. All right. We are dismissed. Keith.